It's odd that, like, instead of denazifying, they decommunistified further, which was Hitler's intention from the jump. It's basically a carbon copy of this, I suspect. I haven't watched this video yet, but I assume it's the same, like, NATO-backed elements that America put in positions of power and offered support to, because that's what happened in Turkey. The ultranationalists rose up and got funding and training and help from under NATO, of course. Got funding and help and training from America.
Most people have heard about the top Nazi leaders such as Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess being prosecuted after the defeat of Nazi Germany in the famous Nuremberg trials. What is less well known is that West German denazification was an utter failure when it comes to thoroughly punishing Nazis in the several trials that were conducted at the time. From 1946 until 2005, after absorbing the GDR, the Federal Republic of Germany convicted 6,656 people of Nazi crimes, and the vast majority of sentences, just under 5,000, were relatively mild, involving imprisonment of up to 2 years. Note that this is a teeny-tiny fraction of the over 200,000 perpetrators of Nazi crimes. Picture this. The number of individuals convicted for Nazi crimes under the Federal Republic was lower than the total number of Nazis who had worked at Auschwitz alone. Up until the end of the 20th century, only 164 Nazis were eventually sentenced for murder, compared to the hundreds of thousands of individuals complicit in the massacre of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. And I want you to keep in mind that anti-fascist Lina A. got over 5 years in prison for allegedly beating up Nazis, while the vast majority of those convicted, literal participants in the Nazi killing machine, didn't even receive 2 years. The half-assed denazification efforts didn't cause outrage among all people in Germany. If anything, a considerable amount of the population who remained in denial about the Nazi crimes opposed these efforts, dismissing the Nuremberg trials conducted by foreign powers as victors' justice. Germany was once again portrayed as the victim. This is no surprise, since a large section of the German population had been supporters of Hitler. 43.9% had voted for the Nazi Party in 1933, with some estimating an even higher percentage of support in the 40s. And they did not turn anti-fascist all of a sudden after the war. Before the state pushed for amnesty a few years later, it was a large section of civil society that helped the Nazis with legal assistance or with smuggling them out of the country. It was the Catholic and the Protestant churches that represented one of the few structural constants immediately after the war ended. The International Red Cross provided the fleeing Nazis with passports. Among those who left illegally were Adolf Eichmann, one of the main
the answer to the question, why are there so many German last names in Argentina? And why does great granddad claim that he came before World War II, but it doesn't seem like he came before World War II?
Architects of the Holocaust. Auschwitz doctor and angel of death, Josef Mengele, the former head of the Lyon Gestapo, Klaus Barbie, otherwise known as the Butcher of Lyon, or Ante Pavelic, Croatian founder of the Nazi collaborating Ustaše. The US Counterintelligence Corps, which was informed about the identity of the perpetrators, helped with the escape. In Barbie, they had found one of their top assets in the hunt for communists. With the help of the Americans, Barbie managed to escape to Bolivia, where he would play a key role in hunting down Che Guevara. 4 years earlier...
Dude, for the record, once again, NATO in its inception, he's describing anti-communist sentiment that Americans and the American State Department is looking for in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Understand that this is specifically Americans working to find the best commie hunters, okay? Immediately after World War II, it was like, all right, it's time to actually get our shit in gear and go after the real prize here. Klaus Barbie should have been up in the gallows. For fuck's sake, the guy's appalling even for a fucking Nazi. Yes.
CIC man Vincent Lavista had described the Vatican as the, quote, largest single organization involved in the illegal movement of immigrants. Through so-called rat lines, Nazis would be smuggled out of Germany through Switzerland to South America, for instance. All with the knowledge of the Church, the Swiss government, and President of Argentina, Juan Perón, with companies such as the predecessor of the Swiss corporation Emschemi actively collaborating in this endeavor. But things didn't stop there. Describing denazification simply as a series of government mistakes or slackness misses the point. In order to fight the danger of communism from without and within Germany, among other things, the West German government saw great benefits in not only sparing the Nazis, but in reintegrating them in the state apparatus. Accordingly, the Nazi ideology continued to have significant influence in the power structure. Anti-communism, which was strongly intertwined with anti-Semitism, served the needs of the new regime. In particular, it was the phantom of the Red Orchestra, which influential Nazis took over from the Gestapo. Communist resistance to Hitler was unquestionably labeled as treason, and it was successfully insinuated that it was now having a stronger effect in the Federal Republic of Germany. It's important to remember that many representatives of the ruling classes in other countries didn't have a problem with fascism in general, but only where fascism endangered their own sphere of influence. Communism was the main danger to capitalism, and fascism was correctly regarded as an effective tool against communist influence. Quote, fascism has rendered a service to the whole world. Hereafter, no great nation will be unprovided with an ultimate means of protection against the cancerous growth of Bolshevism.
I bet this guy has no idea about Molotov-Ribbentrop, though, you know? Just saying. See, here's the thing, okay? Churchill, not a great guy, okay? But I'm not going to sit here and be like, he didn't do some great things against the Nazis, okay? That's it. That's the point. When you're talking specifically about what people did in World War II, okay? It's an entirely different point.
With an ultimate means of protection against the cancerous growth of Bolshevism, said Winston Churchill in a speech he gave in Rome in 1927. So instead of describing denazification as a failure,
he's actually, I think, am I wrong? I think this is Madison Square Garden. That is a Jewish man in New York. This is from Madison Square Garden in the United States of America, which is ironic because he's talking about Nazis in Germany. But this is the famous fuck, what is it called? The American German Bund movement rally that happened. Night at Madison Square Garden is the Night of the Garden is the actual name of the documentary, where this is a Jewish protester that protested against the Nazis, and the police actually arrested him, by the way.
We have to see the adoption of fascism as a logical consequence of class society, whether it's fascism in the form of an actual government system or the use of the fascist movement in the service of capital, e.g., either actively collaborate.
Oh, yes, that's such a good take that I forgot to mention. Of course, the American German Bund movement had to Americanize and like somewhat anglicize their narrative because they wanted to support Nazi Germany, right? So they, and this might come as a surprise to you, maybe you weren't aware of this, like you weren't following during the early stages of the Trump era where I was covering this exact thing, but they tailored their messaging around like, you know, George Washington and understandable white supremacist elements within American formation. And they literally were the first to say America first. Like they popularized the America first narrative where they were like, no, like America first. Like we love America. That's why you need to sign That's why you need to go to war alongside Nazi Germany, not against Nazi Germany. Yeah.
Trading with the Freikorps or the Fasci to crush communists, or just integrating fascist elements in the state apparatus, such as the police, whether consciously or unconsciously, to secure a counter-revolutionary basis for the worst case. In other words, you cannot denazify class society. But this deeper causation and involvement of much wider forces in society was left aside, of course, in the World War II aftermath. Fritz Bauer, the Attorney General who set the Auschwitz trial in motion, spoke of the atomization and parceling of the collective event, which had thus been diffused and privatized. This is reflected in the punishing of a relatively minuscule selective set of people, the tip of the iceberg. Take all the companies and their bosses who had financed Hitler's rise to power, who collaborated with the Nazi regime and profited from forced labor and mass murder in the concentration camps. The Thyssens, the Flicks, the Quants, the Porsche Piechs, the Oetkers, most of them faced little to zero consequences. Industrialist Günther Quandt, whose ex-wife was married to Joseph Goebbels, expanded the family wealth at the expense of concentration camp prisoners or through expropriating competitors.
My family's in the German military-industrial complex during the entire period. There were no penalties. The companies produced screws and nails from 1945 to 1955, and today they are producing tanks again. Exactly. That is the second. This video is great, but there's also a really insidious second thing that is happening right now in Germany specifically, which he started off talking about with the AfD revitalizing that fascist sentiment, right? In a country that has a not-so-distant history with literally this exact same thing. The German military-industrial complex is currently growing once again. And once you have a robust military-industrial complex, that necessitates more imperialism, more bloodshed, more war. And that is fucking terrifying.
Mostly Jewish. And became a major producer of armaments and industrial goods, boosting the war machine of the Third Reich. However, no charges were brought against him at the Nuremberg trials, despite initial investigations. The Quants are the wealthiest family in Germany today. Among the roughly 100 most powerful businessmen who virtually ruled over West German capitalism in the 60s, a majority were the same people as before 1945, people who should have been punished for war crimes. I will dive deeper into the collaboration between capitalists and Hitler in a future video. Nazism this, Nazism that, Nazis, Nazis, Nazis. The West German ruling class got sick of hearing about denazification over and over. They've had enough of it. Schluss mit Entnazifizierung, end denazification, was a campaign slogan of the FDP, which is part of the so-called center-left government coalition in Germany today.
Yeah, I mean, listen, social fascism, baby. It's interesting that you know, that same coalition also existed in the lead up. Please, Germany's only growing their military again because of our policy. They actively resisted for a long time. I mean, after a certain point, you have to remember, it's not even necessarily like America giving the go-ahead or America influencing. It's capital owners that want to make money. This is an opportunity to generate revenue.
But the big winner of the 1949 election was
FDP was never left. They are neoliberal with a marginal social liberal wing. Yeah, they're the gay conservatives. I don't know. I don't know enough about the FDP.
Another party, Konrad Adenauer, from the conservative Christian.
He meant center left with Greens and SPD are as so-called left and FDP as center, but it's all liberal labeled. All three of them are right wing.
Democratic Union, short CDU, was elected as the first Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. The CDU is the largest conservative party in Germany. President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen is a member. A year later in 1950, Adenauer and former officers met in Himmerod Abbey to lay out the conditions for the rearmament of Western Germany, releasing war criminals, putting an end to the defamation of the former soldiers, and the need to change public opinion regarding the Wehrmacht. US President Eisenhower who had previously called the Wehrmacht soldiers Nazis, would suddenly change his opinion, perpetuating the clean Wehrmacht myth and supporting the rearmament efforts, not least because the Yankees needed strong partners in the Korean War and in the fight against communism more broadly. The US soon deemed denazification as counterproductive and agreed with Adenauer in ending denazification efforts. The Chancellor said that
like, in my opinion, doing this, like, liberals who fucking oftentimes like talk about appeasement from the USSR without mentioning appeasement from the West to Nazi Germany, always suspiciously never mention obviously what happened during World War II, but then also what happened after World War II, which is when this becomes infinitely less acceptable. Like, you took all of the fucking genocidal freaks and war criminals and you put them in positions of power because they were rabidly anti-Soviet, anti-socialist, anti-trade unionist sickos. Okay? You did that knowing full well what they had done. You did that specifically because you wanted them to do that again if the scary communist boogeyman ever returned, if the specter kept haunting Europe, okay? The specter of communism.
Main culprits had already been prosecuted. After all, there were much bigger problems than Nazis in Germany in the eyes of the new German government. Stoking the fear of the Red Menace, Adenauer would say, quote, "In a moment you will hear a cabinet resolution that we passed this morning, the aim of which is to ruthlessly remove all supporters of communism from positions in the Federal Republic, whether they are workers, employees, or civil servants." The context was a resolution.
Yeah, sure, Hassan, that's the reason. I remember why shush, Hassan, you're not German. I remember why I find these streams so exhausting. Yeah, sure, Hassan, that's the reason. What was the reason for why America actually put Nazis in positions of power in Western Germany? Can you give me the brilliant five-head take that you have for it? Hassan, you must understand, you must be German to understand the intricacies of allowing Nazis into positions of power in your government is a fucking sick question. Sick take, unless you're like, because they had military experience. Oh, what was the military experience that they had? Who was it against? Military experience fighting who? This is yet another incredible moment where you just repeated exactly what I said in a sarcastic way, in this like super asinine, cynical way where you're like, no shit, the Americans? I think there was military experience against another group of individuals as well that the Americans actually cared more about. Think about it. Considering that the Americans were the ones who were putting them back in power. Think about it. Yeah, I mean, this is like declassified shit. Nazis and Axis collaborators, this is from CIA.gov. Nazis and Axis collaborators were used to further U.S. anti-communist objectives in Europe. Some immigrated to the United States. Leftist conspiracy equals declassified CIA take, always. But this kind of stuff is like really, this kind of stuff is really shitty because, like, this is more so like deliberate omission from most normal, like most of the areas where you could get your education from. And that's where the problem lies. Like, this is the same energy as like not knowing MLK was a socialist, not knowing Einstein was a socialist. It's because it is purposely omitted from the record, despite these people openly stating their political ideologies. And when people don't learn about it, and enough people don't learn about it because they've learned a whitewash perspective and they think they understand it, they think that, you know, the other side is significantly scarier. They make justifications for it. This is where cognitive biases come into play. Like, you have learned a different history. You've learned an incorrect assessment of history, an incorrect retelling of history, and you think that there is no top of the hour ad break. Your bias is kicked in. There is one, okay? And if you want to eviscerate or liberate yourself from the top of the hour ad break, all you need to do is subscribe for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime, or by getting gifted a sub if you're lucky. Right? Here's a 3-minute ad break now.
That the new government passed in 1950 called the Decree Against Enemies of the Constitution, or the so-called Adenauer Decree. While it's worded neutrally, its thrust was clear. Of the organizations named in it, 11 are communist, but only 2 are right-wing extremists. The decree was the prelude to further legal measures against the left-wing opposition. Adenauer targeted not only the Communist Party of Germany and its sympathizers, but also popular resistance to the remilitarization that he sought. While persecuting communists, Nazis were slowly but surely led back to occupying key positions in the new German state. Not only did denazification stop, but it was deemed as having gone too far. So, one of the first things that the Adenauer administration did was to pass amnesty laws, reducing the sentences of around 800,000 people, or even setting them free, including...
This is why I get frustrated whenever people talk about NATO without like the historical development of NATO, the express purpose as to why NATO was developed, like, and why if you are a leftist, like you claim to be a leftist and yet you are a like rigid NATO defender. Okay? You don't have to be pro-Russia. I am not. Okay? I'm not pro-Vladimir Putin by any means, but the idea that you're like, you claim to be a socialist online and yet you're an ardent supporter of NATO is so insane to me.
Including thousands of SA, SS, and Nazi Party members who had been convicted for assault or murder and for actively taking part in the transportation of victims to concentration camps. Among the many Nazi military leaders who were reintegrated into the West German army was Adolf Heusinger, who had served as an operations chief in the Wehrmacht. He later became the head of the West German military and the chairman of the NATO Military Committee. The chief of staff of the German Chancellery, the quote, left and right hand of Adenauer, Hans Globke, had written the commentary on the Nuremberg race laws, which determined who was a Jew, thus deciding who was persecuted and who was locked up in concentration camps. He now said, quote, the German people knew as little as I did. Then there were those Nazis who were key people in the foundation of international bodies, such as Walter Hallstein, who became one of the founding fathers of the European Union, and Kurt Waldheim, who became Secretary General of the United Nations and President of Austria. And of course there were Nazis in the universities as well. Historian and fierce anti-Semite Werner Conze is among them, but also the rector of the University of Freiburg and one of the most influential German philosophers, Martin Heidegger. Heidegger never apologized for his support of the Nazis. He joined the party in 1933 and remained there until the bitter end. After 1945, there was a massive campaign to salvage Heidegger's reputation, claiming that he had been critical of the Nazis all along, but that he couldn't state it openly. All of that fell apart in 2014.
It's so good. Yeah, dude, I promise I was like super critical, dog. Like, I promise.
The latest, when the Black Notebooks were released. And let's not forget the so-called assault gun of democracy, one of the biggest German news magazines, Der Spiegel, co-designed for far too long by old men of the Nazi regime. One of the vice editors-in-chief was a certain Georg Wolf, former SS Hauptsturmführer and SA member. These examples are only a fraction of all the Nazis holding powerful positions in the police, in government and all the ministries, or in the judicial system. And don't get the wrong impression that Nazis only occupied supportive secondary offices. No, they were part of the highest echelons of power. The later Chancellor of Germany, Kurt Georg Kiesinger, had been a Nazi Party member from 1933. Kiesinger would accelerate the reintegration of Nazis and would successfully campaign against the banning of the NPD, a neo-Nazi party that exists to this day. Meanwhile, the Communist Party of Germany was banned.
It's odd that, like, you know, instead of denazifying, they decommunistified further, which was Hitler's intention from the jump. You know, both cleaning his own party of anyone who had trade unionist or socialist or communist opinions, okay? But then also the rest of the country, as a matter of fact. So it's very cool that time and time again, post World War II, you see this exact same strategy being applied in the Western world, right? Canada takes in an influx of refugees from different parts of Eastern Europe that align with the Nazis with the express purpose of trying to change the diaspora culture to be anti-Soviet, anti-socialist in general. Okay. Same thing happens in Germany. It's very similar to destroying Reconstruction era social harmony, or trying to develop social harmony and reinstituting the same social hierarchy, racial hierarchy that existed.
And in 1956, the second and last ban in the history of the Federal Republic, followed by over 125,000 prosecutorial investigations and around 10,000 convictions, reaffirming that within a bourgeois democracy, the communist is seen as a far greater danger than the Nazi. I'll talk more about the persecution of communists and the broader left.
Why do you compare Soviets with socialism? Unbelievable bullshit. You're right. You're so right. Yeah, why would I do that? Well, I'm not the one doing that. They were the ones doing that. You understand that, right? In the eyes of a fascist or a capitalist collaborator with fascists who see fascism as a way better mechanism of organizing society, there is no difference between trade unionists, socialists, or if you're in America, I guess Democratic Party members who are liberal, kind of. You know what I mean? So how can you look at like a historical analysis of how Nazism survived in Germany and how all of these Western countries post-World War II considered Soviets, trade unionists, anyone who had like any allegiance towards communism or socialism or the USSR to be in the same in-group? Is this what your perspective is? Trade unions are banned in the USSR. Oh my God, I'm going to die, dude. I'm not talking about the USSR, man. I'm talking about the Western understanding of like any kind of movement towards even building social democratic principles beyond what was allowed by Americans and capitalists and the capital owner class in European countries. You're trying to do like sectarian infighting for like 1958 Germany. I don't know what to do with you, man. I don't know what's going on.
In Western Germany in the next part. With the exception of Gustav Heinemann, all German presidents from Theodor Heuss to Roman Herzog were contaminated by National Socialism. They had been either members of the Nazi Party or the Wehrmacht, and included a concentration camp.
Like, how do you look at a situation like this and not think, wow, that's pretty fucked up? And your immediate reaction is like, well, the USSR was bad. They didn't let trade unions exist. Like, that's your main point of contention here. Yeah. Unlike in Nazi Germany, they were very fond of trade unionists, you know, specifically. Like, what's the argument? What are we doing? You think these guys fucking did not facilitate in executing them? They did.
Builder or a profiteer from forced labor in those camps. And it wasn't only guys from the conservative parties. Rabid anti-communist SPD chancellor from
Soviet forklift operators over the ones I've worked with.
1974, Helmut Schmidt, had received 7 Nazi awards for his engagement in Hitler's army, and had also been described by superiors as having a, quote, impeccable National Socialist attitude.
Wait, also, you can have critiques of, like, mismanagement of labor, but, I think the USSR did have trade unions. that's like there were other issues, but I don't know. I don't know what your critique is in that situation. You keep hearing that everything is immigrants' fault, not enough houses, care getting expensive, but also keep talking about how there aren't enough people to do jobs and we should get Eastern European immigrant workers. Thanks for educating people about this. People will need it when in 2 to 6 years, the AfD-CDU coalition will take over Germany once again and hate crime all the minorities. AfD-CDU coalition, but AfD specifically, in Germany, the Italian leadership has already fallen to literal fascists. And Marine Le Pen is coming to France as well in the next election cycle. Okay? So that's 3 major power players in Europe. No, I don't care about Orban. Like, whenever people say, like, oh, what about Viktor Orban? Like, no, nobody gives a shit about fucking Hungary, okay? Like, I'm talking about actual countries that matter in the European Union formation. Like, not countries that have, symbolic opinions and are ashamed of being Turkic in origin because they're Christian, so they're different now, okay? Like, give Hungary back to Turkey. Let's be done with this conversation, okay? Forcible Islamization of Hungary and put it under the Turkish control once again, where it deserves to be, okay? Do I really think Le Pen is going to win? Yes, I do. No. I mean, all jokes aside, like, Germany, especially Germany, but like, yes, France, Italy, but especially Germany is really important for the European Union. Okay? The German industry refocusing on the military-industrial complex or building a larger military-industrial complex is a genuine problem. German sympathies growing, fascist sympathies growing in Germany is a massive problem. Germany is the economic engine that drives the European Union, okay? It's fucking terrifying. Actually terrifying. You are joking, but Orban attends summits of Organization of Turkic States? Yeah, dude, are you kidding me? The white nationalist, fake fucking Putin supporter who relies on EU giving its state money to exist is never going to be like, yeah, let's go and join the Turkic states. Like, he's not. As long as you can like offer amenities and like offer welfare, some level of like social safety nets to the people, it's going to be a little bit harder to implement that fascist spark in the population. If you look to the economies or the happiness metrics, which are kind of silly in most cases, but like if you look at the confidence that people have in their governments, in countries that have larger social safety nets whose economies have not suffered, there is less reactionary momentum. But there still is reactionary momentum because, like, no matter what happens, social democracies still fall into that same capitalist trap where there is still always going to be an erosion of said social safety nets. But there is always going to be a need. There's always going to be people who want to privatize certain aspects of the economy or further privatize it and try to erode mechanisms of regulation and control on the free market, because capitalists always want more profits. And the best way to do that is by starving the beast. Neoliberalism, like you saw under the Thatcher administration, but also the Reagan administration. Okay? So when that happens, oh my God, dude, why couldn't you explain this to Ethan? I did. Okay, I'm banning motherfuckers who still want to do debate purgatory in here. You are not a fan of mine. You are not a fan of the truth. You are just in here specifically to try to get me to eat debate and get mad at you instead so you can clip it and derail the conversation. It's very unproductive. So yeah, as I said, like reactionary movements growing in attitude in Sweden, especially. A lot of people will tell you it happened due to like migrant Muslims, right? Whereas those reactionary movements started growing before there was a massive war on terror and a refugee crisis caused by it. It actually started with the erosion of social safety nets. It predates Muslim migration. It's never about migration. Never. It's always the erosion of material conditions and people getting angry about said realities, and then this creating a perfect environment to like focus your efforts on something else, an external force. And that's how nationalism and fascist fervor rises. Okay? That's how America is so fucking psychotically fascist and nationalist as well. Think about it this way. Joe Brandon's Bidenomics. Joe Brandon's America. Look at inflation. It's sky high. Look at the immigrants. They're coming over. They're fucking destroying our culture and our society. It's like, no, they're not. There is no immigrant scourge that is destroying this country, okay? Not immigrants. It's not even AI. You said AI is? No, it's not AI either. It's capital owners. It always has been. It is the bourgeois, okay? Always has been, always will be, until we evolve away from the formerly necessary economic organization of society that you call capitalism. There was a point in time when the bourgeois revolutions and capitalism was demonstrably better in collectivizing, okay, and was demonstrably better than the prior formation of feudalism. But now, under our current global organization of the economy, we have moved back towards neo-feudalism instead of the internal contradictions that exist under a capitalist organization of the economy, inevitably creating an impasse that paves the way to a more evolved understanding, which I would call socialism. As MLK said, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. Absolutely. It absolutely has. Do you think that North African immigrants coming into Europe share the same values as Western Europeans? Yes, you racist fucking piece of shit. They do, okay? They want to put food on their tables. They want to have clothes on their backs. They want to have shelter. They want to exist in a world where they can do fulfilling labor. They want to be emotionally and mentally stimulated. Yes, they do. Unless you think that North African immigrants are somehow different. Well, I'll just ask you questions. I wanted to know what you thought. Come on, dog. I can spot a fucking idiotic, biased, racist-ass fucking comment like this from a mile away. If you truly believed in, if you were actually on the other side, the opposing side of this, instead of doing the cynical, just asking questions type shit, because you are a pussy, just like you are a racist. Most racists are pussies at the end of the day. You wouldn't have asked it in this way. You would have said, why do you think pussy-ass racists claim that North African immigrants coming into Europe have different values than Western Europeans when that is not the case? But you didn't say it like that. You said it in the way that you did because you're a pussy and you're afraid that people are going to call you a fucking Nazi. Don't try to backtrack out of it. Just be fucking real. So you think they align on everything. Now you are moving the goalpost and saying they have to align on every single thing. Okay? Every single person here who understands their class position is more aligned with an immigrant that also understands their class position and unified on the same agenda that we must uplift all material conditions for all workers across the world than a fucking Nazi little shit like you. Because you, at the end of the day, will be a loyal foot soldier to capital owners while you won't even get cut into the fucking profits. Do you understand? So I have more aligned with people like that than I do with you. When push comes to shove, you will turn around and you will be a foot soldier, a loyal foot soldier to those who do not have your material interest at heart. A dog, a rabid one that will inevitably be put down. Just asking questions, dude. Like I haven't been fucking dealing with like cynical online Nazis who always do like these just asking questions shit. Yeah. Jacking off in the chat.
Just take a moment to digest this. This isn't just utilizing a few former Nazi members for their know-how. This isn't just marginal elements of Nazism that survived. This is structural. A certain Otto John, who was the first chief of the German Domestic Intelligence Agency, had enough and ranted against the, quote,
that was a normie Dutch person's opinion about North Africans? Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just like, okay, ask a fucking normie American their perspective on, their opinion on like, I don't know, Guatemalan migrants coming into America or Haitian migrants coming into America. They are going to be blinded by vitriolic, racialized hatred. I already described where that vitriolic, racialized hatred comes from and how it's weaponized and how it's utilized. The anger that you feel is towards those who actually control all mechanisms of society. It is not the random person that is coming into this country with only clothes on his back and maybe a fucking iPhone to make a better future for himself, okay, for his family. It is actually the bosses that cut your salary. It is the bosses that steal your surplus labor value. It is not the immigrant coming over the border. You and him have the same exact fucking interests. You want to have clothes on your back. You want to have shelter over your head. You want to eat food. Okay? That's it. You want to put food on your fucking table. Those are your interests. And the only way to achieve said interests is by working. Okay? By becoming a wage laborer.
In West Germany, and then quit his job. His successor was a former Nazi, but more on that next time. Professor Albert Norden from the GDR published the seminal Brown Book in 1965, covering around 2,000 powerful people in Western Germany with a Nazi past, including 100 admirals and generals, 15 ministers, 828 judges or state attorneys, 245 officials in the Foreign Office and at embassies, 297 high police officers and members of the so-called Verfassungsschutz, protection of the Constitution. This one is important.
I'll be back in a second.
We'll talk about the Verfassungsschutz in the next part. The West German government seized the book on a book fair and claimed that it was all falsification and, quote, communist propaganda. However, the communist propaganda in question turned out to be largely correct. And bit by bit, research in the coming decades would uncover more and more about the Nazi structures existing within the Federal Republic. The response of the West German government was to point out how Nazis were reintegrated in the East as well. And you'll hear this line of defense today as well from liberals and conservatives. What about East Germany, they'll ask. Now, to be sure, it is true that former NSDAP members found their way into the East German state as well. But the comparison is laughable. Denazification in the Soviet zone had been a much higher priority, even to the point of being criticized as being too harsh. Large landowners and the so-called Junkers, who were also often former Nazi supporters, were quickly expropriated in the East, while West German parties started to urge the Allied powers to stop denazification. It was not until years later when the West German politicians started pointing the finger back to the East. In fact, a huge amount of Nazis fled to the West, convinced they would get away with much less punishment. And they were right. A total of 12,890 sentences were passed in East Germany, almost double the number in the West, despite East Germany having less than 1/3 of the population of West Germany, And that despite the massive transfer of Nazis from East to West. Former Nazis in East Germany were 6 to 7 times more likely to be prosecuted and found guilty than their Western counterparts. Furthermore, not only were former Nazis more likely to be prosecuted in East Germany, but they also faced much harsher punishments if convicted. And lastly, Nazis were represented to a much larger degree at the very top of the political and economic hierarchy than in the East. And this will become very clear throughout this series. In the German Democratic Republic, individuals recognized as fighters or victims of fascism were provided with additional pensions and other privileges as a way to acknowledge their suffering.
It feels like these kinds of people are all over this platform. Every time you're pro-humanity, you got called a communist or dumbass, when really it's all about treating people equally. It's really heartbreaking. There's so many people who don't give a shit about other people's standard of living. What the fuck is wrong with them? They're just lashing out in anger. I appreciate you going over these topics. I remember some of these topics from AP World History, but the curriculum moves so fast, and sometimes we didn't get to all the context. Thank you. I can't speak on AP curriculum, AP History, because I didn't go to school in America. But I suspect that they don't cover it from this perspective at all. I'll be honest with you, that you're not going to see a lot of even sympathetic points of opinion, even if historically accurate assessments are technically sympathetic to that position in American schooling. I would say I don't think that happens.
On the other hand, Nazis were granted generous pensions in the West, while those who had fought against the Nazis and were interned in concentration camps received no pensions for those periods because they were considered not to have made the necessary contributions. Now,
I promise you, in my history book, there was a section on Marx with so many sections mentioning how controversial and unpopular ideas were. Yeah. Like, I think, you know how I've talked about the different tiers? How I've talked about the different tiers of transphobia and how, like, it becomes a mental illness, and the final stage of that mental illness is demonstrated within transvestigations, right? A similar thing can be said for anti-socialist sentiment as well. And I think one of the most advanced forms of anti-socialist sentiment is when you attribute, like, some policies from Mao or Stalin to Karl Marx. When you say that, you've like reached a level of 17-head consciousness where you're just like, anyone that's ever said sharing is caring is actually responsible for famines, which of course, still exist under capitalism, but then it's the human beings that are just L nerds who aren't picking themselves up by their bootstraps hard enough that are just dying to famine-related diseases. 14 million to be exact every single year under a global capitalist organization of society where technological improvements have created a surplus of food supply and not like a scarcity as ones that existed in other lesser developed, less technologically advanced societies was they were desperately trying to collectivize in the course of a short period of time. Okay.
I have my criticism of the GDR's development over the decades, and this will likely be the subject of another video. What I want to stress here is that this deflection to the East is a cheap excuse to distract from the very real and consequential problems existing.
It's not worldwide. 14 million
today.
Is 14 million is worldwide, not the US.
That modern so-called United Germany is a new third thing. It's not. The Bundesrepublik Deutschland is the state apparatus of West Germany. And yet, liberals are perpetually in a rush to demonize the specter of communism for all their problems, including the rise of the AfD. But this will be discussed in one of the next parts. SS Commander Herbert.
That's my favorite meta, is being like, actually, Nazism is rising in these countries, like, or fascism is rising in these countries because people are fighting it too hard. And that is literally just pre-World War II era liberalism played over again. Like, what are we doing? This is why the never again concept has to also feature more of like the buildup to the never again moment. It's like, oh, really? That's crazy. We were fighting the Nazis too hard. That's why, like, they got galvanized in their position. That's crazy. Maybe you shouldn't have been such a fucking pussy at the time and also join the fight against the Nazis to make sure that they don't fucking thrive. Nope. Never mind.
Kappler, who was head of German police and security services in Rome during the war, had organized a massacre of 335 Italians in 1944 by shot in the neck. For this, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in Italy. What is less well known is how politicians like the Social Democrat Chancellor Willy Brandt campaigned for his pardon. Brandt's goal was to pursue a policy of so-called internal reconciliation, reconciling former Nazi followers and opponents of the Third Reich. The West German government appealed for a release of Kappler, which the Italian authorities denied. However, in 1976, he was transferred to a hospital.
Yeah, the Italian authorities are too busy doing like Illuminati fuck parties, the NATO-aligned Illuminati fuck parties that, and sending fucking mail bombs and shit, really cool stuff the Italian authorities were doing. Good thing that, fascism would never actually rise in Italy again, right? Obviously. I mean, that'd be crazy.
He managed to escape, likely with the help of a carabinieri. Despite calls for his extradition back to Italy, the West German authorities refused and did not prosecute Kappler for any additional war crimes, citing his poor health as the reason. Kappler...
You're glad to see a return to theory rooms? This is not even theory. This is just regular history, European history that is like the secret dark side of European history that oftentimes many Americans or many Westerners in general are completely oblivious to. And I do think that it's a necessity because, like, for far too long, a lot of liberals have thrived in this community, or rather have not, like, really re-examined their position at all.
Died peacefully in 1978. And it was not until decades later, after most of the Nazi Party members had died in peace, when the West German authorities made a half-hearted effort to investigate re-Nazification. A 2012 study by the Federal Ministry of Justice itself found that a whopping 77% of its senior officials in 1957 were former NSDAP members, more than researchers expected. And their number even increased after 1949. Historians also found that, up to the 70s, over 80% of top judicial officials had worked in Hitler's justice apparatus, among them those who had handed down death sentences during the Holocaust. And in 2014, almost 70 years after the fall of Hitler, the Federal Ministry of the Interior also finally commissioned a group of historians to investigate its past, with depressing results. Between 1949 and 1970, the proportion of former Nazi members was 54%. Among them, the lawyer Gerhard Scheffler, who had already served in the Reich Ministry of the Interior in the 30s. During the war, he was responsible for the Germanization of businesses and organized the deportation of Poles and Jews to ghettos. He reappeared in 1950 in the Federal Ministry.
It's just a oopsie. Ja, it's just a oopsie. Das ist ein major oopsie. Yeah. It's a mistake. I mean, who amongst us, Oopsie.
Interior. From 1955 as head of the Social Department, where he was instrumental in preparing the
Oh mein Gott, ich kann nicht glauben. Das ist ein Oopsie. Ist Oopsie, ja. Ein großes Versehen. Oh, großes Oopsie, ja. Not gut.
Sozialhilfegesetz, the Federal Social Assistance Act. So this of course had a great impact on German politics. The most striking case was that of the head of the Residence and Asylum Law Department, Kurt Breuil, who had never abandoned his fundamental anti-Semitic attitude, and who was then responsible for rejecting Jews who had fled from Germany.
It's gross that it's taking you this long to do a German accent. True. I don't usually deploy it, but, 25 minutes of fucking seeing seeing so many Nazis not get punished in Germany and instead get celebrated and also put into positions of power. This video didn't even feature like the NATO side of things, for the record. It just straight up was just talking about, like Western Germany communisting instead of denazifying. But there's that component as well, which also, in my opinion, plays a role alongside this as well. Like, this is how it was done.
That this is the ministry which is tasked with the quote-unquote protection of democracy and things such as media and cultural policy. Regarding the Nazis that were reintegrated into the Federal Foreign Office, Adenauer said, quote, "You can't build a foreign office if you don't have people, at least initially in the senior positions, who understand something about the history of the past." Out of 17 diplomats who sat in the political department at the time, 13 had previously held NSDAP party membership cards.
Before you say, I'm starting to think Germany's just waiting at this point, that's not true. That's not fair, at least. Because just like in the build-up, in the lead-up to the Nazi party taking power, there were plenty of fucking awesome Germans who were fighting against said Nazi consolidation of power, okay? There were. And there are plenty of Germans to this day who carry on that torch. The problem is those in positions of power oftentimes avoid them or purposely push them aside or, have their own McCarthyist trial-style movement in Germany, as you guys saw here. What? Maybe the NATO part is in your imagination, because American exceptionalism or diabolism, if being accurate. Wait, that's so sick. That's crazy. The guy is back. He said, maybe the NATO part is in my imagination. No, it's not. It actually was featured in the video, just not as heavily featured as one would. But here you go, man. It's so fucking easy. Google is free. It's so easy. It's free 99. These NATO generals had unusual backgrounds. They served in the Third Reich. Yeah, it's the USSR Bandy Unions guy, which, by the way, of course, you're adding American exceptionalism into that take. Yeah, I know. Listen, man, I can smell where your narrative is coming from. Okay? The Hasan is an American. Hasan's foreign policy is just America bad. Is pure copium. Okay, it's pure copium coming from people who desperately want to say America good, but are too big of a pussy to say it. Just say America good. You like America. You like any and everything that the United States of America has done. Okay, just say it. At least the conservative is honest. Okay. The conservative is honest. The conservative is like a bloodthirsty monster. The reactionary is openly a bloodthirsty, vicious monster. The reactionary doesn't hide behind like the aesthetics of civility, liberalism, the aesthetic. Well, some conservatives do that too. The conservative reactionary does not hide behind the auspices of anarchism. Okay. Just say you like America. It's okay. You live in America. You're selfish. It's fine. It's very, very frustrating to come in here and also present like it's not a 0-1 binary thing, motherfucker. Herd of nuance. Oh, notice how you got stomped harder than the neo-Nazi heads that you're talking about. Literally in one immediate fucking Google search, and it took you 2 minutes to come back and try to drop a second line Like, you didn't go, hey, you know what? Maybe you were right on that point. I am going to read and learn more about it. That's what a normal person does. Okay? A normal person goes, hey, you know what? I'm a little bit out of my element here. I'm a little bit out of depth. Okay? Well, you didn't do that. You didn't do that. And instead, you went along with, what does NATO have to do with governance? Yes, dude, you're right. NATO, nothing to do with governance at all. That's not how that works at all. Yeah, just having like American military bases in your country has nothing to do with a demonstration of hard power and soft power simultaneously. It's just, you know, just for funsies. It's not a 0-1 binary thing, motherfucker. Herd of Nuance is also a wonderful contribution to the discourse as well. Go ahead, explain to me the nuances of having Nazis inside of NATO. Like, if your goal isn't to stomp out communism, okay, if you don't consider that to be a dangerous, scary ideology, which I assume if you've been a fucking 58-month subscriber, you like at least have to have some allegiances to communism, right? Socialism, anarchism, something. Like, so why do you defend an institution that was designed with the express purpose of murdering communists, socialists, trade unionists, and the like? Why?
An effective memory culture, Erinnerungskultur, a culture of dealing with its Nazi past so as to not risk repeating history. As I hope to show with this video, as also confirmed by recent events, most of that narrative is bullshit. According to a poll, over half of Germans want to move on from remembering the country's Nazi past. Among AfD voters, it's 80%. A chilling 58% of the supporters of the increasingly successful far-right party further stated that Nazi Germany had its positives. But what about today? Surely, now that the old Nazis have died off, there's no chance that there's significant fascist influence in a democratic state.
Yeah, of course not.
Germany today. Well,
Shit.
You thought wrong.
Almost fell.
It was one structure in particular which would become
Wait, that
one
is
of
what
the
I
most
thought.
important
Fuck!
pillars in the West German state, being a core node of a secret counter-revolutionary Nazi network that's in existence to this day. It is this crucial building block of the German capitalist bureaucracy I deliberately left out in this part because it deserves its own video. So, in the next part, we'll analyze the history of an organization led by none other than the former Wehrmacht general and Nazi military intelligence chief in the Eastern Front, a notorious hunter of communists, recruited by the CIA to build an organization that would turn into one of the most important anti-communist
Wait, what's he talking about?
agencies in the world, the Organisation Gehlen.
This was fire. Great video overall. Wait a minute. I don't understand. Is this guy trying to say that like a lot of hardline fascists who participated in the Holocaust were hired by the CIA to continue doing at least some parts of the Holocaust? You know, the anti-socialist parts at least, like, huh.